I found my son's second family by accident. At dinner, I placed one item on the table, and everyone went silent. If you're watching this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to know where you're listening from, so leave a comment below. My name is Thorvaldis. For 30 years, I've dedicated my life to preserving and cultivating the world's rarest orchids. My greenhouse complex outside of Portland is my sanctuary, a place where beauty and truth exist in perfect harmony. If only human relationships could be so straightforward. I've always believed that patterns reveal themselves if you observe closely enough. In my work, I can predict precisely how a plant will respond to changes in its environment. But my son Leaf? He proved to be far more unpredictable than any rare species I've ever studied. Leif grew up watching his father's academic career implode after his research on climate-resistant crops was exposed as fraudulent. The divorce that followed was bitter, public, and left deep scars on our family. I raised Leif alone, pouring everything into ensuring he understood the value of integrity and honesty. Or so I thought. By all appearances, Leif had become everything I'd hoped. At 34, he was the founder of Verdant Futures, an architectural firm specializing in sustainable design. His marriage to Octavia Zephyr, a world-renowned cellist, seemed ideal. Their daughter Persephone was bright and curious, with her father's analytical mind and her mother's artistic sensitivity. I remember the day of their wedding 8 years ago. It was held in the central dome of my greenhouse, surrounded by blooming orchids from 6 continents. Octavia wore a gown the color of new leaves, and Leif looked at her with such devotion that I felt certain he would never repeat his father's mistakes. "Mom," he said to me that night, his voice earnest after perhaps one too many glasses of champagne, "I promise I'll never let you down. What Dad did to you, the lies, the betrayal, that ends with his generation, I believed him. Why wouldn't I?" Leif had built his entire career on principles of sustainability and transparency. His architectural designs were celebrated for revealing the inner workings of buildings rather than concealing them. The irony of this would only become apparent to me later. The first hint that something was amiss came 3 years ago. Leif began taking extended research expeditions to study coastal ecosystems for his sustainable building projects. These trips grew more frequent, sometimes lasting a week or more. Octavia, busy with her own international performance schedule, seemed to accept these absences as part of their mutual commitment to their careers. But Persephone, then only 3, said something that lodged in my mind like a splinter. During one of our greenhouse afternoons, while her parents were both away, she looked up from the orchid she was carefully watering and asked, "Grandmother, why does Daddy have 2 phones?" "2 phones?" I echoed. "Yes. One he talks on with us, and one he hides in his special box and only looks at when Mommy isn't home. Children notice everything." I filed this information away but didn't act on it. Perhaps it was a work phone. Or maybe he was planning some surprise for Octavia. I refused to jump to conclusions based on a child's observation. Then came the day that changed everything. I had traveled to Astoria on the Oregon coast to source rare aquatic plants for a new installation. The Frost Marine Research Center had developed a method for cultivating endangered seagrasses, and I hoped to adapt their techniques for my aquatic orchid species. The center was perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, a stunning example of sustainable architecture that immediately reminded me of Leif's work. As I toured the facility with the director, a young woman approached us, tall, with intense eyes and hair, the color of driftwood. "Dr. Valdis? I'm Indigo Frost, the center's lead biologist. I'll be showing you our cultivation tanks." Something about her struck me as familiar, though I was certain we'd never met. As she led me through the facility, explaining their conservation efforts with passionate precision, I noticed a pendant hanging from a leather cord around her neck, a piece of driftwood carved into the shape of intertwining waves, inlaid with a small piece of amber. My heart stuttered. I recognized that pendant immediately. It was one of a pair I had commissioned from an Icelandic artist for Leif's 30th birthday, crafted from driftwood collected from our ancestral homeland shores. The amber came from a piece my grandmother had brought to America. I had kept one pendant and given the other to Leif. I managed to maintain my composure as Indigo continued the tour, but my mind was racing. Perhaps Leif had given the pendant to her as a professional gift? He often collaborated with marine scientists for his coastal projects. Then we passed a small office, its door ajar. Inside, prominently displayed on the desk, was a photograph of Indigo with a little boy about 3 years old. He had Leif's eyes, the distinctive Valdis eyes, with their unusual gray-green color that had passed down through generations of our family. "Your son is beautiful," I said, my voice somehow steady. Indigo beamed with pride. "That's my Orion. He's 3 and already obsessed with starfish and tide pools. His father says he's going to be a marine biologist like me, but I think he might follow his dad into architecture. He's already building the most incredible structures with his blocks. His father must be very proud," I said carefully. "He is. Though he doesn't get to see Orion as much as he'd like. The divorce proceedings are complicated, and his ex makes it difficult." She sighed, then brightened. "But he's here for a full week this time. In fact, he designed this research center. Perhaps you know his work? Leif Valdis of Verdant Futures?" The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Divorce proceedings? Ex-wife? Leif was still very much married to Octavia, who had just performed with the Portland Symphony the previous weekend. I had attended the concert with Leif and Persephone. "Yes," I managed to say, "I'm familiar with his work." Indigo continued, oblivious to my shock. "We met when he came to consult on the center's design. He's brilliant, isn't he? The way he integrates buildings with their natural surroundings. It's like he can hear what the landscape wants to become." These were almost the exact words I had used to describe Leif's talent in an interview for Architectural Digest last year. "When do you expect him back today?" I asked, dreading and needing the answer in equal measure. "Around 6. He's taking Orion to the tide pools this afternoon." She glanced at her watch. "Actually, I should wrap up our tour. I promised to meet them there." I thanked her for her time, made vague promises about future collaboration, and left the center with my mind in turmoil. In my car, I sat staring at the ocean, trying to process what I'd learned. My son, my principled, honest son, was living a double life. He had another woman, another child, all while maintaining his marriage to Octavia. I drove to the public beach where the tide pools were located. From a distance, I watched as Leif, my son, knelt beside a small boy, pointing out sea creatures in the shallow pools. Indigo joined them, and Leif greeted her with a kiss that spoke of comfortable intimacy. They looked like a family, happy, connected, real. The betrayal cut deep, not just of Octavia and Persephone, but of me, of everything I thought I had taught him, of everything I thought he was. I didn't confront him then. I drove back to Portland in a daze, questions swirling like autumn leaves in a storm. How long had this been going on? Did he plan to maintain these parallel lives indefinitely? What would happen to Orion, an innocent child who believed his father was separated from a nameless ex-wife? Over the next month, I became an investigator of my son's life. I discovered that Leif had purchased a second home in Astoria under an LLC 3 years ago. His research expeditions perfectly aligned with his time there. He had created an elaborate system of fake projects and conferences to justify his absences to Octavia. Most disturbing of all, I found that he had opened separate college funds for both Persephone and Orion. He was planning for a future where his deception would continue indefinitely. I also learned that Indigo was no foolish, gullible woman. She was brilliant in her field, dedicated to marine conservation, and genuinely believed that Leif was finalizing a complex divorce. He had created a narrative where Octavia was unreasonable and used Persephone as leverage, which explained why he couldn't introduce Indigo and Orion to his daughter from his first marriage. The more I uncovered, the more I recognized patterns from my ex-husband's behavior. The compartmentalization, the justifications, the ability to look people in the eye and lie without hesitation. Leif had learned more from his father than either of us had realized. I considered my options carefully. I could confront Leif privately, but that would allow him to control the narrative. I could tell Octavia, but that would devastate her and Persephone without giving Indigo and Orion the truth they also deserved. Whatever I did would cause pain. The only question was how to ensure that the pain led to honesty rather than more deception. The solution came to me while tending to my rarest orchid, a species that only blooms when exposed to specific conditions. Some truths, too, need the right environment to emerge. I decided to host a special dinner at my greenhouse to celebrate the anniversary of my business. I invited Octavia, Leif, and Persephone, telling them it would be an intimate family gathering. I contacted Indigo separately, explaining that I wanted to discuss a collaboration between my greenhouse and her research center, and suggested she bring Leif and Orion since they would be interested in the botanical aspects. I arranged for them to arrive 30 minutes apart, enough time for everyone to be seated before the second family arrived. The table was set in the central dome, surrounded by blooming orchids, the air heavy with their fragrance. Octavia arrived first with Leif and Persephone. My granddaughter immediately ran to examine the new flowering specimens, while Octavia helped me arrange the final touches for dinner. Leif seemed distracted, checking his phone frequently. "Expecting an important call?" I asked him. "Just a potential client," he said smoothly. "I can silence it for dinner." I nodded, noting how easily the lie came to him. "Before we start, I have something special to show everyone." I retrieved a small wooden box from my office and placed it on the table. Inside was my half of the driftwood pendant pair, identical to the one Indigo wore around her neck. Leif's eyes widened in recognition, then fear. "Mom, where did you—" The greenhouse door chimed, announcing new arrivals. Indigo's voice echoed through the dome as she explained something about pollination to Orion. Leif froze, his face draining of color as his two worlds collided. Octavia looked toward the entrance, confused. "Are we expecting other guests?" Before Leif could respond, Indigo and Orion entered the central dome. Indigo stopped abruptly when she saw the dinner table already occupied. Her hand went instinctively to the pendant around her neck. "Dr. Valdez?" she said uncertainly. "I thought we were meeting to discuss the seagrass project." "We are," I said calmly, "but there's something else we need to discuss first." I turned to Octavia. "This is Indigo Frost, a marine biologist from Astoria, and this is her son, Orion." Octavia smiled politely, still confused. "Nice to meet you. Are you collaborating with Thora?" "One?" Indigo's eyes had found Leif, who stood rigid beside the table. "Leif? What's going on? Who is this?" The moment stretched like glass about to shatter. Persephone looked up from the orchids, noticing the tension. "Daddy, who's that boy? He has eyes like yours and mine." And that was when I opened the wooden box and placed the driftwood pendant on the table. Indigo's hand went to her identical pendant, and understanding began to dawn on her face. "This pendant is one of a pair," I explained, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions. "I commissioned them from an artist in Iceland for my son's 30th birthday. I kept one and gave the other to Leif." Octavia looked from the pendant to the matching one around Indigo's neck, then to Leif, her brilliant mind putting the pieces together. "Leif? What is this?" Indigo took a step back, pulling Orion close to her side. "You told me you were separated, that your divorce was nearly finalized." Her voice trembled. "You said your ex-wife wouldn't let you introduce me to your daughter." "Ex-wife?" Octavia's voice rose sharply. "Leif, what is she talking about?" Leif looked trapped between his two lives, both now fully visible to everyone in the room. "I can explain," he began, but the words seemed to fail him. "Please do," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Explain to both of these women, and to your children, exactly what you've been doing for the past 3 years." The silence that followed was deafening. Persephone, sensing the adults' distress, came to stand by Octavia. Orion, confused by the tension, pressed closer to Indigo. "Who are they, Daddy?" he asked in a small voice. That innocent question seemed to break something in Leif. He sank into a chair, his carefully constructed worlds collapsing around him. "Orion," he said, his voice barely audible, "this is Octavia, and that's Persephone, your sister." Octavia made a sound like she'd been struck. "Sister? Leif, do you mean to tell me that this child is my son?" Leif finished. Yes, what followed was the most painful conversation I have ever witnessed. Tears, accusations, revelations of years of systematic lies. Octavia, usually so composed, shook with rage and grief. Indigo's initial shock gave way to a cold, analytical anger as she pieced together the extent of Leif's deception. The children were the most heartbreaking. Persephone, old enough to understand that something terrible was happening but not why, kept asking if Daddy was going away. Orion, confused by the adults' emotions, eventually started crying, which only added to the chaos. I took the children to my office, setting them up with books and gentle plants to touch, while the adults continued their confrontation. Even through the closed door, I could hear the pain in the women's voices as they compared timelines and discovered just how elaborate Leif's deception had been. When I returned to the dome, Octavia was gathering her things. "I can't be here anymore," she said, her voice hollow. "I need to take Persephone home." Indigo nodded stiffly. "We should go too." She hadn't looked directly at Leif for several minutes. "Wait," Leif pleaded. "Please, both of you, let me explain." "Explain what?" Octavia asked. "How you've been living a double life, how you have another child, how every research trip was actually you visiting your second family." "I never meant for this to happen," Leif said. "It started as, I don't even know. Indigo and I connected over the research center design, and it was supposed to be temporary, but then she got pregnant, and I couldn't just abandon her. So instead you lied to everyone," Indigo said flatly. "You told me your marriage was over. You told me you were fighting for custody of your daughter. Was any of it true?" Leif looked at the floor. "I care about both of you. About all of you. I didn't know how to choose, so I tried to keep everyone happy." "Happy?" Octavia's laugh was bitter. "You think any of us are happy right now? You've destroyed everything, Leif." I stepped forward then. "Before you all leave, there's something else we need to discuss. The children." That stopped everyone. Whatever anger the adults felt toward each other, Persephone and Orion were innocent victims in this situation. "They're siblings?" I said simply. "Half-siblings who didn't know the other existed until today. Whatever you decide about your relationships with Leif, those children deserve to know each other." Octavia and Indigo looked at each other, really seeing each other perhaps for the first time. Two intelligent, accomplished women who had been unwittingly connected for years. "She's right," Indigo said finally. "This isn't about us. Or him." She shot a cold glance at Leif. "It's about the children." Octavia nodded slowly. "They shouldn't suffer for his mistakes." In that moment of shared understanding between these two remarkable women, I saw the first glimmer of a way forward through this mess. The weeks that followed were difficult beyond measure. Leif moved out of both homes into a small apartment. Octavia filed for divorce. Indigo, her trust shattered, refused to see Leif, except for matters directly related to Orion. But something unexpected emerged from the wreckage of my son's deception. Octavia and Indigo, initially brought together by betrayal, developed a cautious friendship based on mutual respect and their shared love for their children. They arranged playdates for Persephone and Orion, who delighted in discovering a new sibling. As for me, my relationship with Leif was deeply damaged. How could I trust a son who had maintained such an elaborate deception for years? Yet he was still my child, and I could see that beneath his justifications and excuses, he was drowning in shame. 3 months after the dinner that changed everything, Leif asked to meet me at the greenhouse. He looked thinner, older, the confident architect replaced by a man humbled by his own actions. "I've been seeing a therapist," he told me, carefully repotting an orchid as we talked, a habit from childhood when difficult conversations were easier with his hands occupied, trying to understand why I did what I did. "And?" I prompted. "I was terrified of becoming dad," he said quietly, "of being exposed as a fraud. But in trying so hard not to be him, I became something worse." "Your father's fraud was professional," I pointed out. "Yours was personal." He nodded, accepting the harsh truth. I told myself I was protecting everyone, that what they didn't know wouldn't hurt them, that I could be a good father and partner to both families if I just managed everything carefully enough. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. I was wrong. So wrong. "Yes," I agreed. "You were. Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" I considered this carefully. Forgiveness isn't something you're entitled to, Leif. It's something you earn through changed behavior over time. Right now, focus on being honest, completely honest, and on being the father your children deserve. 6 months later, we gathered again at my greenhouse. Not for a dramatic revelation this time, but for Persephone's 7th birthday. It was a small celebration. Octavia and Persephone, Indigo and Orion, myself and Leif, who had been invited by both women in a gesture of cautious reconciliation. The children played among the orchids, while the adults maintained a fragile civility. Leif kept his distance, engaging with his children but respectful of the boundaries both women had established. As I watched Persephone show Orion how to carefully water an orchid, using the techniques I had taught her, I reflected on how patterns repeat across generations, sometimes in ways we intend, sometimes in ways we fear. My son had broken trust in the most fundamental way. The relationships damaged by his deception would never be the same. But as Octavia and Indigo spoke quietly together, occasionally sharing a knowing look or even a laugh, I saw that something new was growing from the broken pieces. Not a restoration of what was lost, but something different, something honest. The pendant that had revealed Leif's deception now hangs in my greenhouse office, a reminder that truth, like the rarest orchid, requires the right conditions to flourish. Sometimes those conditions are painful, even devastating, but without truth, nothing of real value can grow. If you're watching this and carrying the weight of a double life, I urge you to find the courage to end the deception before it's exposed. The pain of honesty, however great, pales beside the destruction of a truth revealed too late. And if you, like Octavia and Indigo, have been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, know that healing is possible. Not a return to what was, but a path forward to something new, something built on honesty rather than illusion. As for me, I continue tending my orchids, observing their patterns of growth and dormancy, death and renewal. I watch my grandchildren, both of them, learning to care for these delicate living things, and I hope they absorb the lesson that has come at such a high price, that real beauty, like real love, cannot thrive in deception. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please share it. You never know who might need to hear it today.